investment.
We need to hear from Jack
We have a very different record.
We need Jack Layton's turn.
Robert asked us a very straightforward question. He asked you a question. Why would you be reducing corporate taxes to the biggest, most profitable companies right now when so many people are suffering? Now, you try to claim that there aren't any corporate taxes cuts going on right now. It's simply not true. And you actually know that it's not true. You did get it through with the support of Mr. Ignatieff, who now, by the way, pretends to oppose the things he voted for. You did get it through a couple of years back. But those cuts are still coming, and they're very, very costly. And I'm asking myself, because I'm remembering a Stephen Harper once upon a time, who came here to change Ottawa, was going to stick up for the little guy. But you've become what you used to oppose. You've changed in some way. I mean, you used to care about the environment, and now we're at the back of the pack internationally. You said you'd clean up Ottawa from scandals, and now we've got the most closed, secretive government we've pretty well ever had, with scandals and people stuffed in the Senate and charged with fraud. Our health care system, you said you cared about that, but
okay,
we've got people with no family doctor.
Mr. Layton, let's give Mr. Harper a chance to respond.
What changed?
Look, no corporate tax cuts right now. We want to keep rates where they are,
simply not true,
so we can continue to create jobs and grow the Canadian economy. We do this for ordinary Canadian families. That is our focus. That's why in our most recent budget, the next phase of the Economic Action Plan, we're maintaining transfers for health care. It's why we wanted to eliminate the cap on medical expenses for ordinary people in the tax system. It's why we wanted to have incentives for doctors and nurses to go to underserved areas.
These are the things, Stephen Harper.
These are the things that were in the Economic Action Plan. The old Jack Layton would have supported those things instead of forcing an election that nobody wanted. And I hope when we get back to Parliament, the old Jack Layton will come back and focus on the very issues that the old Jack Layton... The old Jack Layton...
I may be a grandpa now, but
Gentlemen, Monsieur Duceppe and Mr. Ignatieff.
Mr. Flaherty said that he will have to cut billions of dollars in certain programs to come to zero deficit. And he said to the Maclean magazine, April the 8th, that he had a list. He said that very clearly. So when we're talking economy, the population has to know what's on that list. Exactly what's on that list. Because Mr. Flaherty said...
Let's be clear, Mr. Duceppe.
So what's on that list?
First of all, let's be clear. Our plan to reduce the deficit does not depend on some program of cuts. We've laid it out in the budget. It's very clear. The International Monetary Fund says it is a credible and realistic plan to reach balance. What we've said is that we believe we can continue to find efficiencies in government to reach that faster. We're looking at trying to find 5% in efficiency savings over the next 3 years. I think that's a responsibility we have in government. I think anybody who suggests you can't find efficiencies in government is quite frankly not connected to reality.
Where's that?
Mr. Harper, we're having an election because you couldn't tell the truth to the Parliament of Canada about the money you're going to spend on jets, jails, and corporate tax giveaways. That's what this viewer can understand. We're in the middle of the biggest deficit in Canadian history. You didn't tell the truth to the Canadian Parliament. You're the first Prime Minister found in contempt of the Canadian Parliament. And right now you're trying to persuade Canadians you're not cutting corporate tax.
Well,
you cut it from,
first of all,
you've cut it down to 15, it'll go from 16.5 to, and nobody can understand why that makes sense when we're in the middle of the toughest deficit we've seen because of your waste and mismanagement.
Mr. Harper.
Mr. Ignatieff, let's be clear. It's been clear. The contempt motion that you guys pushed was a motion you three voted against us. You had more votes than we do. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's based on any realistic facts, but you were determined to have an election, whether the public wanted an election or not. What we view Canadians should be focused on is the economy. We're keeping taxes down to create jobs. That is working. Canada's job creation is far superior to virtually any other country, advanced country coming out of this recession. We're making investments in training to make sure, and in our educational institutions, to make sure Canadians can participate in that economy of the future. And we're opening trade markets. These are very fundamental things to keep this country strong and make sure we can deliver affordable benefits to Canadian families.
You can't, this is about the economy. You've got to tell the truth about the economy. The Canadians don't understand why you're prepared to spend $30 billion on fighter jets, $13 billion on prisons, and $6 billion in corporate tax giveaways when we're in the middle of a serious deficit. The numbers don't add up. You won't be able to pay for health care. You're not telling the truth to the Canadian people. This is about the economy, and it's about telling the truth about the choices.
Let's tell the truth about jets. The current jets we have flying over Libya today, the CF-18s, will reach the end of their life at the end of this decade. What we have decided to do, and by the way, what other parties have always said in the past they support, is replacing those jets at the end of their life. We will not be spending a dime on these jets for at least 5 years, and then we'll be buying them for a period of over 20 years. Mr. Ignatieff wants you to believe, and the other party's leader wants you to believe, that somehow by canceling a jet purchase 5 or 10 years down the road, they can finance election promises today. You cannot do that. The only way they can finance their promises is raising taxes.
We're saying you don't know what the jets are going to cost. That's the issue. You have no idea what the jets are going to cost.
Thank you. What we know, Mr. Harper, is that the billions of dollars that you want to spend on these jets down the road will have to come from health care and education and child care and things that people need here in Canada today. That's where the money will have to come from. Now, and this is going to be about some choices. Well, you may reject it, but the fact is that the Conservative government is the problem here when it comes to our economy. If I may just finish my point, Steve.
Forgive me, gentlemen. We can't all hear when you're all. Gentlemen, we can't all hear when you're all speaking.
Just let me finish
my point. Another 20 seconds. Finish the point.
The Conservative problem is the Conservative government is the problem with the economy here. It's these right-wing proposals of deregulation and approaches to reckless policies that got us into the mess we're in, and why people can't make ends meet today, and their retirement security is so much up in the air, and there's so many people still out of work, 200,000 good paid jobs lost that you have not recovered, and your policies don't address them.
Well, first of all, I reject the kind of choices that Mr. Layton and the other leaders are trying to present Canadians, saying that we have to make a choice between the men and women in the uniform and health care, saying we have to make a choice between East and West, or we have to make a choice between employees and employers. We have balanced policies to move us all forward together. That's why Canada is emerging from a global recession, a recession nobody thinks began in this country, why we're emerging faster and stronger than others. Because we have a balanced approach that makes investments in people when we can afford it by keeping their taxes low.
See if we can get a couple more comments in this segment.
But the question asked is, how much cost a plane? You said $75 million. Kevin Page said $128 million. Two American experts said $133 million, and the other one $150 million. So could you come with facts, figures, to make the population know what we're going to spend on that and how much and for what? Why don't we have calls for tender on that one?
Well, we've been very clear what the budgeted numbers are for these, but the important point to remember, these are 5 to 10 years down the road. Why is the opposition making an issue of this now? Because they need money. They need money today to pay for promises the country cannot afford. And you can't pay for promises today by canceling an aircraft purchase 5 or 10 years from now.
Mr. Ignatieff.
That's just false, Mr. Harper. If we peg the corporate tax rate at 18%, we can invest in Canadian learning. We can give every single person who wants to attend college or university a learning passport. That's $1 billion investment in post-secondary education. You spent that in 72 hours at a G8, G20 photo op. That's the kind of choice that this viewer cannot understand. It's poor economic management.
Mr. Ignatieff, you're not able to invest in healthcare and service and education that matter to people by raising taxes. You do that by growing the economy. That's the way you create tax revenue.
18% is a fully competitive corporate tax rate, and you know it.
That's what Canada's doing. And the tax rates we have today have been set not just by this government, but by Liberal and NDP governments across the country, have made sure we have competitive tax rates. We come in and raise those rates now, we'll be sending a very negative signal to investors. As I say, the foremost expert in this matter in this country says this will cost 200,000 jobs at a time when we're creating jobs. It will cost $40 billion of investment at a time when investment is coming into this country. We are not going to go off track for promises that have been made that cannot be afforded.
Mr. Harper, rather than a big corporate tax cut to the banks and the oil companies who sock it away in reserves and give it away in million-dollar bonuses, what we should do is follow the NDP plan. Our plan says, let's give $4,500 to any company that creates a new job right now. Let's reduce the small business tax rate from 11 to 9%. We should be helping the small businesses. That's what you used to be all about, by the way. And that way, we would create jobs all across this country right now.
Out of time for a 20-second response.
Let me look at the facts. We have cut rates for businesses big and small.